Thank you so much for coming. We'd like to thank William S. Hart Park for co-sponsoring our event today and for allowing us use of this nice hall. At this point, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our moderator for the day. He's one of our local historical experts in Santa Clarita, a former president of the Santa Clarita Valley Historical Society, a former writer and editor for the Newhall Signal newspaper, and currently the president and CEO of SCV TV, which is our local TV and internet news station. Leon Ward.
Thank you, Alan. This is an important day in the history of Santa Clarita, not just because all you fine folks and so many James Dean impersonators are packed here into Hart Hall. We should really thank County of Los Angeles Department of Parks and Recreation for allowing use of this place and going in with the Historical Society on this. But the fact that we're here is really testament to, well, a lot of people, but three people in particular that I want to single out. One of them is certainly Alan Pollack, the current president of the Santa Clarita Valley Historical Society, who's done a bang-up job ever since I went off the board. I don't know what that's about, but Alan Pollack, thank you. You've done a great job. Two other men I want to single out among many who've had a role in this are E.J. Stevens, who really has been kind of the driving force behind this particular program, and he's also breathed new life into the Friday night flickers to the point where they're not even on Fridays anymore, so now they're just flickers. E.J.? Whoa. And Jeff Boltinghouse at the back of the room, or actually walking to the back of the room right now, who rigged this up for sound. I know that's and picture. That's been a big endeavor. So Jeff, thank you. Well, this is an important day in Santa Clarita history. And I look at it like this. There are many facets of our history that are well documented and proven. I mean, we can prove that we have the first discovery of gold in the first documented discovery of gold in California. So we can prove that because Francisco Lopez filed some paperwork with Governor Juan B. Alvarado in 1842. We can prove that we had the first commercially productive oil well in Pico Canyon in 1876. Oil company records show us that, as well as the first commercially successful refinery right down the street. Now, did James Dean stop in Santa Clarita on the day he died? Maybe that's not as momentous a thing as the first gold or the first oil. But here's the deal. We present that as fact. We present that as fact in books. We present that as fact on television. We present that on fact on the internet. Among the many things that happened in Santa Clarita, James Dean stopped at a Tips restaurant in Castaic Junction and ate his last meal. But what if he didn't? It's kind of funny to think that in 1955, an event that happened much more recently than all those other things which we can prove, we have not yet proved that James Dean stopped in Santa Clarita on the day he died. We haven't seen any, dated photograph from September 30, 1955, showing James Dean sitting at the counter at a Tips restaurant. We've got stories. The problem there is that when we present it as fact, it's at the same level as first gold, first oil, that kind of thing. We need to put an asterisk there until we prove it. Because if you are presenting things as fact, and then they turn out not to be true, that casts a shadow on all these important things that are proven as fact. If somebody comes along one day and proves that James Dean did not stop in Santa Clarita on that day, it opens up the door to people saying, well, hey, maybe they're lying about the first gold, maybe they're lying about the first oil. Even now, it's great to tell anybody in Northern California that gold was discovered here 6 years before Sutter's Mill, and they think you're crazy, even when they've got the documented facts. So hopefully, at the end of today, we will be able to erase that little asterisk on this historic footnote and say that either James Dean did stop here, he didn't, or he might have. This is an important day because I don't think we're going to get any closer. We never have gotten closer, and I don't think we ever will get closer than we are right now today in knowing what happened on September 30, 1955, because of this wonderful panel that E.J. and Alan and everybody have put together. So with that, E.J. and Alan and Susan Shapiro and I correct up, the road that James Dean took on that day and met with the officers, all of the officers who were involved that day. We met with Odie Hunter, who you're going to see in this half-hour show that we put together, who gave James Dean a ticket on that day. And we met with two gentlemen who were kind enough to join us today, and you'll be hearing from them directly and meeting them on our panel discussion. And that's Ernie Tripke and Ron Nelson, who were the two investigating officers of the crash. And you'll see them in here too. So with that, EJ, roll tape. Starting with Jack Tucker, who, come on up, Jack, and try and find your way to the seat on the far side. Jack is a film editor. He's one of the editors who worked on James Dean Forever Young, which is a great documentary on the life of James Dean. And the life, but not the death. This is the death. This is about the life. And, Jack Tucker is the Emmy-nominated editor. Yes. Whose credits range all the way from, I was looking on IMDb, all the way from Shogun on the one end to Nightmare on Elm Street 4.
It was a fun movie.
There you go. And the producer of James Dean Forever Young is also with us, and that's Michael J. Sheridan. So, Michael, come on up and let me... Michael is actually editor and producer of That's Entertainment 3, as well as James Dean Forever Young, which is narrated by Martin Sheen. And he also is an award-winning film editor, producers, directors, all those things, who was gracious enough to give us permission. I know it was hard to hear, but you could see the old color video from the 50s in the piece that we just showed. We owe those to Michael J. Sheridan for giving us permission to use those, and everybody else who was involved in James Dean Forever Young. Now we have a couple of authors with us today. And first I want to bring up Chris Epting. And I'm looking for my cheat sheet here. I guess the book's a little backwards here when I'm not looking. There we go. Yeah, got it. Chris Epting is writer and photographer who's put out 16 books. 16 books, and his titles include James Dean Died Here, appropriately enough, but also things like Led Zeppelin Crashed Here, and Elvis Presley Passed Here, and he's going to tell us about what exactly did happen here. I hope on September 30th of 1955, and the other, am I creating that feedback?
Right on the edge.
Okay.
As good as it's going to get.
And back here. Warren Beath is with us also, and he is the author of The Death of James Dean, and I think keep that up on Amazon.com. Another great chronicle of this event, which is really, the fact that you're all here 50-some-odd years later really is a testament to, just kind of the lingering, the way this thing has lingered on and has become a whole, not just a life, but particularly the death of James Dean has been something that's the subject of numerous books and obviously still has the interest of some folks now. I believe we are... Okay, well, we're at somebody who a lot of folks in this room will know, and that's a gentleman who interviewed this tip waitress. back in, I think it was 1985, and wrote a story that, we saw the headline, a little bit of the story in that piece that we just did, under a nom de plume. But you might know him as the former publisher of the Signal newspaper, Tony Newhall. Come on up. Now then, two gentlemen who were featured prominently in this piece, who are sitting here at the front of the room, and I'm going to let them come up here at their own pace. So why don't you guys come on up? And that's Ernie Tripke and Ron Nelson, who were the two CHP officers on scene, as you saw, who investigated the crash. And so we are real happy that they've driven all the way down here from the San Luis Obispo area to be with us today and for you to meet and ask them some questions. So I'm going to move out of the way as you get up here. Okay. Now that is a historic panel. And I think what we probably ought to do is get a little bit of background on the life of James Dean before we start going into his death. And perhaps that is something for our authors and filmmakers to get into, because especially with our filmmakers down at the end, you really, have nailed the life of James Dean. So why don't we go ahead and start out and tell us a little bit about, you can decide who wants to go first, but tell us, where he was born, how he ended up in the movie business.
Could you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
Where did James Dean come from? Where was he born, and how did he end up in the movie business?
He was born in basically Marion, Indiana, and raised by, he came to Los Angeles with his father when, I forget how old he was, but his father was transferred to the the Thoughtdale Dental Hospital out in Westwood. And they lived in Santa Monica for up until the time he was 9 years old, and his mother got ill and eventually died of cancer. And his father felt that he couldn't raise him by himself, so he made arrangements with his sister, who was Marcus Winslow's wife, in Fairmont, to raise him, and would come back and see him and what have you. And while living in Fairmont, he developed this interest in acting and became, involved in high school. And he always wanted to take it a step further, and he came back to Los Angeles, lived with his father for a little while, and went to UCLA and transferred to, actually went to Santa Monica City College first, and then transferred to UCLA to study drama, and started doing some workshops with James Whitmore. And Whitmore told him that if you really want to be an actor, go to New York. There's this new medium called television, and they're doing live, hundreds of hours of live television every week. So anyway, prior to going there, he did do, which in our documentary, he did, I think, about a half a dozen shows in Los Angeles. Went to New York, and in the time that Jack and I spent researching the show, we spent 5 years before we cut 2 frames together, tracking down Dean's life in New York. And he did 40 television shows, which we've substantiated 38 of them. There was a director that told me that he did Dean in 2 Martin Caines, but nobody's ever talked about that. Anyway, when Warner's actually, Elia Kazan saw him in a play and decided to use him in East of Eden. And when he came out here, Warner said he was an overnight sensation, which really was a bunch of bull because this guy spent 5 years honing his craft. You know. So anyway, I don't know, Jack, you want to jump in and do something?
Yes, we spent a long time getting James Dean Forever Young made, and now we're in the process of trying to put out a video set on DVD of all these lost television shows that we were able to find that most people have not seen in 60 years. So that should be coming out sometime this year. The television legacy of James Dean. And James Dean was a great inspiration to everyone. I never met him in person, but I met him 5 years after he died when I saw East of Eden on the big screen and was so touched by his performance, I came to Hollywood to make movies. He inspired me to be here. And Martin Sheen told us when we were recording him that Dean was his inspiration too. He continues to do that. He is an inspiration. He died very young, but he was frozen in time. When Michael and I were back in Marion for the Dean Fest, we met two little girls, 19 and 20, who were absolutely in love with the man, and the fact he would have been 74 didn't seem to faze them. Because he'll always be 24 years old, forever young.
Now, only one of his pictures had been released while he was still alive, right?
East of Eden.
And then I think Rebel was released, what, the day after?
Well, it was released October 10th, in a limited amount, and then a month later they went national with it. They were very uncomfortable because they had never dealt with a dead star of his popularity and sitting on not one but two films that haven't come out yet. So, but you know, his legacy took a life of its own on, and we have great friends at Warner Brothers, and his three films are considered evergreens. They have made millions of dollars from them in the video VHSs, and then now DVDs, and now they're going to go to Blu-rays. It's a cash cow. You know, so.
And then Giant was released a full year later.
Yeah.
Right? So if only one film was released during his lifetime, and there were only a total of 3 pictures, altogether, what made James Dean? Why was he so big when he died? Anybody?
Have you seen East of Eden?
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an incredible performance. And it still stands up
You
today.
pull the mic over.
I'm sorry. It's an incredible performance, and it still stands up today, and it still affects people as much as it did in 1955. So I think that there was something about this guy that we could all identify with. There was a vulnerability there.
Is his rock star persona greater today than it was in his lifetime?
I think so.
It's almost like there's a pre-James Dean and a post-James Dean. The pre you're talking about, but then after 1955, you talk about a perfect storm of a movie like Rebel Without a Cause being released just after this guy is killed, at a time where you really hadn't lost a celebrity in that manner up until that point. I mean, you'd have like Will Rogers might have a plane crash. Nobody that appealed to the youth at that point. This is before Elvis Presley. And here's this guy who, in the movie Rebel, allows for this release of all that adolescent stuff that was going on in the mid-1950s in America, much more sort of repressed time. And I think it's after 55. And you couldn't make up a movie like that being released on the heels of this guy's death, telling him to be a Syrian pop culture hero, and you can't have him because he was killed. He didn't die the way a lot of celebrities died, in wreck and ruin. This guy, I mean, if you're going to go out, this guy went out in the most spectacular ways. Young, handsome, speeding, sports car, wearing the jacket that he wore in the movie that was going to the mountain. I mean, you really couldn't have scripted this anymore to create a guy today. And it's to the point of how big he is today. I brought a quick souvenir. My son collects baseball cards. Recently, he got, they also, these days, put in other kinds of cards, non-baseball related. Last year, Don Russell Company inserted pieces of history into these cards. And one of the big cards last year, he opened a pack of baseball cards. Here's a piece, an actual piece of James Dean's bathrobe in this embedded. And it was one of the biggest cards last year among peers because James Dean was still, there's still this cachet. I don't want to see that football. It's interesting to see. But it was, to me, such a testament of what this guy can do today and this brand. It really isn't done. The brand out was so beautifully preserved. And everything, he never had a chance to falter. He never made any bombs. I mean, really, even TV, he didn't do, but man, there was so much great television on Playhouse 90 and, wonderful television shows back then. He never, his body of work is so pristine. Not like it.
He's almost, I think if you said religious figure, I remember when I started researching this, and you might go to a library and you're looking for a Look magazine or a Life magazine, and when you got the James Dean article, it was torn out. It was gone. These sorts of things were considered relics, and so he's gone into folklore. But his life conformed to the hero pattern. He had an early show of talent. He was brilliant. He had his time of trial in New York, and then then he was glorified, and he died a sort of sacrificial death, as evidenced by the people that sort of followed him and imitated him and picked up his beacon in the continuing interest. And John Lennon said, said we're more popular than Jesus or whatnot. But but Dean was certainly some sort of savior figure, I think, for this century. And said he invented the teenager. Before him, you were Brandon DeWilde or Alan Ladd. There wasn't that middle ground, and he staked that out, defined it, and made it his own. And that's
real or perceived, was there a dark side to James Dean? I mean, did mothers tell their daughters not to go to those movies?
He, did some things that might be considered unhealthy. He was photographed with a noose around his neck, and he eventually died of a broken neck. He was photographed in coffins. He rode around in hearses, but I don't know if that's a dark side or that stagecraft, because that certainly set him aside from Cap Hunter posing with mallards and pipes and things like that. He wasn't Robert Wagner. He was edgier, and he went for something different that made him unique, and I think that's part of his brilliance.
Ernie and Ron, you didn't know who James Dean was when you arrived at the scene of the crash.
I had no idea who he was. Eventually, many people would come by and stopping and things like that. At any rate, I was on the patrol for nearly 30 years. No accident has so much notoriety, background checks, and afterward checks for 25, 50 years. 50 years actually is when it started slowing down. I kept getting calls from not only USA, England, Italy, Germany, France. We all went over and took pictures on James Dean, yet he was deceased. But it got to be almost a pain in the neck. There these people would show up, and some of them I mean they were really demanding too what they wanted. But this continued, as I say, for 50 years. And somewhere along the line, someone says, "Wait till 50 years is over, and you're not going to get many calls."
Well, so then, what was it? EJ calls you up and says, "Hey, are you that Ernie Tripke?"
He was the first one after 50 years, because it stopped just like you turn off the light switch.
Mm-hmm.
So
that was only 3.5 years ago. So
pardon?
That was only 3.5 years ago. 50 years.
Yeah.
So.
At any rate, it stuck with me all the way. I've never forgotten it.
Tony, I'm not gonna ask how old you were when James Dean died, partly because I already know, but did you have a sense of James Dean at the time?
Totally. I was 14 when he died, as a matter of fact. And I remember I heard a lot about him because of East of Eden and just a general talk among teenagers in the early 50s. And I remember when he died, I was in a drugstore back in Massachusetts, 3,000 miles away, and I remember the high school seniors of a nearby high school saying, "My gosh, you see the paper that actor James Dean died?" They knew who he was. I knew who he was. And only one movie had been out. It had been out about 4 or 5 months at that time. And of course, I started hearing more and more about him as Rebel and Giant were released.
Who wants to tell us about his interest in auto racing? Okay.
Can I derail your presentation? I just was thinking here how amazing these gentlemen are, and I wanted to thank them personally because I've been interested in this in 40 years, and they've been unfailingly polite and helpful. I've never heard of any discourtesy or rebuff or rejection. And I can say for a fact they're tolerant of 17-year-old boys and middle-aged men, and I'm 57 today, but it was about 40 years ago I wrote Mr. Tripke, and he sent me a letter back and a diagram, and by God, I was off and running. I was an investigator.
Can I add to that? I was going to say, too, it's surreal having those guys here. As someone who's, I've been to the site a bunch of times, and Warren's book was always kind of my Bible. I mean, I did a book called James Dean out here. It's only one of about 600 sites, but it occupied the title of the book because of how monumental it was. And again, Warren's book was always a definitive book. You wanted to go to the scene and relive it, feel it, kind of breathe that air. But to have these gentlemen here today, I've never met them. And to think that they were part of that moment, that snapshot that many years ago, is really, just thanks for coming. Really,
well, we're darn privileged that they would come down all this way from where they live.
It's like they didn't ask for this. It's something people get sort of history bumps into them. People don't go out looking for these moments to uncover something or spot. The guys who were on site in Don Lennon, they didn't know who they were going to see, and I think it's amazing, and I'm always fascinated by people who, you wake up one day and you don't know that later on in that day, your life is going to do this 180, and you're going to become part of something that, whether you like it or not, you're part of forever. And I think it's just always interesting why people get picked out for that. And the thing they were involved with really is monumental. I mean, to have this crowd today, it's really, I have to tell you, to the organizers, this is spectacular to have this kind of, community in a historic event like this. It's really something, a beautiful Saturday afternoon. You have a full house here. I think it's very cool. So thank you guys all for coming.
We're going to come back to this racing, but what were you doing in 1955? Why didn't you know who this guy was? What do you think?
I was like Ernie, I thought it was a sausage man.
What do you mean sausage? Once you realized who it was, had you heard of him before?
Well, yes, I had heard of being a sausage man, and also James Dean, but I didn't really know much about him.
I want to ask about his racing, and we watched that California Highway Patrol TSA, thanks to Mr. Sheridan, we heard James Dean say that he is extra cautious on the highway now, and that he confines his racing to the track, and apparently he can go 105, 106 miles an hour now, and he went through a number of cars I know. What can you tell us about his interest in versus attraction to racing, and something about the cars that he was driving?
I can help you with that. I think he was...
Well, there's no doubt that he was doing some high speed at different times because he was breaking in the car to race it. But we couldn't prove that he was doing over 55 miles an hour when he went through this intersection because he only traveled 45 feet after point of impact. Turnip Seed's car traveled 15 feet. I heard a guy on the radio one time say that, he was going 90 miles an hour
I got on the phone and I called him and I said, before you make statements like that, you ought to check your facts. I said that if he'd have been going 90 miles an hour, there'd been nothing left of James Dean, his car, he'd be 300 feet out on the pasture.
And that's the mighty big pasture out there. We're talking farm country here. In the middle of farm country, why wouldn't he be speeding? I mean, he's out in the middle of basically nowhere. Isn't it normal to go like way over the speed limit in the middle of nowhere?
That's right. He was trying out the car,
still,
trying to put some miles on it before he raced it. But
why not speed?
Yeah, but he stopped at Blackwell's Corner in a way, so he wasn't too far away from the scene of the accident. But I interviewed Donald Turnipseed, and I'm firmly convinced that if he had the lights on, there'd never been an accident. Like a lot of the modern cars right now, the minute you start the car, even during the daylight, the lights come on. And it was this time of the night where the road and the color of his car, Donald Turnipseed did not see him. I'm firmly convinced if James Dean hadn't died, that Donald Turnipseed would automatically receive the citation for the accident.
Violation of right-of-way.
Right-of-way.
Let's go down here on the other end, and why don't you give us a little bit of background about his racing career, his second career?
Me?
Sure, whoever wants to jump in.
Well, in a nutshell, he placed second in his first race, third in his second race. He blew a motor and he was killed on the way to the fourth, so it was kind of a case of diminishing returns. But he exhibited a lot of talent. In the first race, he placed first in the novice class and third overall. And it was said that he had real good hands and reflexes, and that the seasoned racers were surprised at how adept he was in the track with no more experience than
Where all did he race? I mean, in those clips that we show, I believe they were from Santa Barbara.
Bakersfield was Bakersfield and Palm Springs.
Do you know if they ever raced out here at the Saugus track, the Saugus Speedway?
I asked somebody, and they told me it was like a dirt track, and he never did that, or midget racing also, and they didn't do that type of race.
So we don't know.
His airport races were the only ones, to my knowledge, that he participated in, so that was sort of a vogue at the time. The sports cars were expensive toys of doctors, no offense, Alan, and that sort of thing, and and they would set out these courses with bales of hay on airport runways.
Well, we had a couple of airstrips out here at that time, didn't we, Tony? Is there any reason to believe that he ever came out here and used one?
Never heard about it if he ever did.
Before we get onto the racing, is just another question. I mean, folks here are used to seeing the Santa Clarita Valley on film. Was any part of any one of his 3 films shot in the Santa Clarita Valley at all?
I don't believe so.
No. Okay, that was definitive. Okay, we got one.
No, but there are landmarks. If you're in Los Angeles, obviously up at the planetarium there, Griffith Park, there's a nice marker where they shot some of Rebel, and down in Texas, I think on the ranch where some giant blue zone is open now. So there's, not a lot, obviously, not a lot of stops. There are some.
So what attracted Dean to racing?
Dean was attracted to many different things. He was also taking ballet lessons. So, I don't know. I think he liked going fast. Jane Withers told me that he really liked to travel fast. I think he tried many different things and was interested in many different things.
Tell us about the Porsche Spyder and how it came to be, how James Dean came to be behind the wheel.
Well, he bought one.
His agent, not his agent, his insurance guy, Lou Brecker, saw the Porsche Spyder in the window of competition. Dean had already bought the Speedster and had it for, he bought it when he came back from New York. New York had the world premiere of East of Eden. He passed on being there, but the day after he got back, he bought himself a Speedster, sort of a present for himself. And he had gone to Palm Springs. He raced the Speedster, not the Spyder. And he had seen at Minter Field in Bakersfield, the Spyder, and Brecker saw one in the window of Competition Motors in Hollywood and told him about it, and he went down and he literally bought it, turned in the Speedster and bought the Spyder. Yeah.
So, on that Friday, they were going to go out to a race in Salinas. Who was the they? I mean, we know that this Ralph Wiederich was he from the Porsche factory?
Yeah, he worked for Competition Motors. Dean had tried to get a half a dozen different people to go with him, and Bill Hickman, who was a stuntman, actor friend of his. If you ever saw Bullet, he's the guy that drives the car that goes into the gas station. You know, he's one of the hoods. He was a good friend of Dean's, and he agreed to go. Sanford Roth, who is one of the world's famous photographers, went with Dean. It's an interesting story how they met. Sanford worked for Warner Brothers, and one day they asked Sanford, they wanted him to either cover Jack Lemmon or James Dean, and he said, well, who's this Dean kid? And they told him, so he was literally walking out on the lot, and Dean came around the corner of a building and saw Sanford with all these cameras hanging on his neck. Dean was a nut for photography. And he said, they introduced each other, and Roth told him, he says, well, I just, made a deal to cover you for the next, half a dozen months or whatever. And they became very close friends. He used to hang out at Sanford's house and what have you in West Hollywood. Anyway, Sanford went, Bill Hickman went, and Dean and Roth. Those are the four people. Yeah.
And the two of them were in. We've heard it referred to alternately as a truck or a station wagon.
Yeah, well, it was Dean's station wagon in the trailer that they were dragging along.
They were towing, pulling the race car originally. He didn't drive it out of Competition Motors that morning. That happened later, right? After they stopped for breakfast, they decided to put some miles on it. So that day is...
Where did they stop for breakfast?
Farmer's Market.
Yeah.
In Hollywood.
Right, it was actually the ranch market, though.
Yeah.
What's that?
I think it was actually... there was a ranch market. It was like a donut place or something about a block away from Competition Motors, and that's where they walked to. But Farmer's Market is another example of something that's perpetuated. I think they even have a James Dean pinata. What are those breads called?
James Dean pinata.
Yeah, what are those things?
Oh, that's even I think Dupar's, the market at Farmer's Market, for a while claimed they were the place. There's lots of different sort of claimings that day. But the spot where there was a color photo in the video of him putting gas into it, that spot, that gas station, is a florist shop today, but the island, they left the housing of the gas station. It's in Sherman Oaks.
Yeah, it's still there.
And that's kind of interesting because, again, you can
What intersection is that on?
Pardon?
What's the intersection?
Ventura Boulevard and where Beverly Glen comes down. Yeah.
But structurally, it's the same as it was. It's just no longer a gas station. But that's sort of one of those spots where it's hard physical evidence of that last day, of which there is so little. The original Blackwell's corner is changed and revamped and shifted over, but the gas station is totally intact as a florist. So that's kind of neat.
So after stopping for breakfast, then they go over to Competition, and they leave, and it's Dean and Wuderich in the Spyder, and then the other two guys who are driving
the Ford station wagon.
And it's pulling a trailer.
Yeah.
And the idea was that they were going to trailer the sports car.
Initially, yeah.
But they don't, and so they leave in this little two-car convoy.
Two-car caravan, yeah.
And that's about noon.
Yeah.
And then what happens?
Then, Warren, where do they decide to take the car down and drive it up? Do you know exactly at what point that...
Well, my understanding is they drove They drove it from Competition Motors, and
Well, yeah, I thought it was on, they were going to tow it originally, but at some point they said, no, let's take it down.
there's
and
two
put
things.
miles.
Some people say Dean wanted to get more time behind the wheel, and that's probably true. I think the car I've read between 800 and 1,500 miles on it, but also driving it might not have been the best idea because it would have taken the edge off the motor, but he had the mechanic with him that could work on the car and tune it up, and I think that was one of the conditions of purchase, was that Rolf accompany him. So he was in the car all the time, but I think after the ticketing he was in the lead all the time, but they traded back and forth for, some period before that.
And then
So it was he drove it from Competitions, and there's pictures of him in the car at the curb ready to take off.
And then they stop then they get something to eat, and then they stop for gas, and they head out on Sepulveda probably toward, 5 wasn't there, I guess, so 99.
99, yeah, the grapevine.
Okay, so we're on the 99. Now what? This is kind of the important part to us here,
Well, like you were describing earlier, he may have stopped right nearby here. I always read that. Warren, you seem to think that's true as well, right?
I think today he did stop at Tips.
I think I read it in something that you wrote that he stopped at Tips.
I put it in my book, but I'm glad I don't have to change the book. I think as a result of this, and it was actually, do you want me to explain it, or?
Sure, please.
You did that translation. The story, which was almost too cute to be true, was that there was this stop, a roadside diner, and this sort of bizarre homoerotic episode where, can I say that here? Where Dean gives Rolf a ring. And there's this exchange, and that's repeated again and again, and that this happened. And the incident itself sounded unlikely, that there was a thing of rings. It sounded like a fan magazine writer's confection to have a cute story about these two guys that are going.
This was Ludwig being quoted in the Porsche publication.
What you quoted was that he gave credence to that. That there was this was in 1960 that he did. Dean did give him a ring, so that made me look at the other accounts again. That was something that didn't come out of nowhere. But in that Porsche article, he didn't say that he stopped at Tips, did he? He said he stopped at Blackwell's corner. But I looked at this stuff again. If the ring story was true, it made sense to me. He could have stopped somewhere else, and he'd had substance abuse problems, tried to kill his wife, different things had happened, and he might have ellipsed the two circumstances and assigned the exchange of the ring to Blackwell's corner. But the story was in a couple of fan magazines that were attributed to Rolf's involvement in the 50s. But the very first, the earliest mentions, there was a year after the accident, a writer named Algene Meltzer did a thing, his life and loves, and he specified Tips. He said at the top of the grapevine, and he didn't mention the ring. And there was a venerable writer, he's still around, William F. Nolan, who did a lot of sports car type reporting, and he wrote an article also, and he said, this was like about 18 months after the accident. These are the first accounts, and he said there was some stop at a roadside diner, and he also said he talked to Rolf, and that Rolf said he gave a warning to Dean that it's a big jump from the Speedster to the Spyder, and be careful. And essentially, that article that you translated, and I trust that one because it was a sports car article, it wasn't a fan magazine, he said the same thing. So the same comment is back in the very, very earliest articles. And the writer Algene Meltzer, he said he talked to Rolf, and I believe he did. Unlike a lot of other writers, he did get the inquest. He didn't have any misinformation, and he had two interesting details. He said Rolf pulled on a red checkered shirt, which, apparently he did. And he also said the driver of the other car had a pregnant wife, which I learned years and years, decades later, that was actually the truth. So I think he did some homework, and he did talk to Rolf, and that this incident of stopping at Tips did not come out of nowhere. He had no reason to throw that in, and there's a certain consistency, and it was there from the beginning. Maybe memories have faded a little bit about it, but I do trust that.
So I'm sorry. The first mention of Tips was when? What year?
I got the evidence. Got the proof right here.
He'll do this under oath now, so that forever.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the writer William Bast reported tips in 1956 in his biography of James Dean, but he also got everything else about the accident wrong, I think, and had it happening in San Bernardino. But it was in Motion Picture Magazine in September 1956 that Al Jean Meltzer mentioned tips. Modern Screen, 6 months later, an article by William F. Nolan, which was a race car-oriented article, His Love Destroyed Him. And he claimed also to talk with Rolf, and he also mentioned the roadside stop and some of the conversation. Then the 2 discrediting articles were in Modern Screen in 1957 and the fall of 1958, Death Drive and My Last Drive with James Dean, that purported to be ghostwritten. They were ghostwritten accounts from Rolf Wuderick, and in the German article it kind of discredited it. They said my ex-wife did that, but who hasn't said things about their ex-wife? But anyway, the exact wording from those original articles was literally just plagiarized, you know. And so that was the original. That was the source, and I can't think of any reason that he would have thrown that meaningless detail in there than Rolf actually told him.
Do you remember in the German article how much time there was between the time Wuderick said they left the gas station and the time they got the ticket?
No, I don't, because you didn't translate all of it. But if you ever want to sit down and get a letter perfect transcription.
I mean, that's it's interesting information that it showed up in 1956.
They were only there for a few minutes, I imagine. They're consistent that there was some ice cream involved in the ring.
Because one of the challenges was that I know that, you know, Alan Pollack went through several weeks of the signal from September and early October 1955, because you'd think that if he was so famous and he stopped at tips on the day he died, it would have been in the signal. Tony, help me out here. Why do you think I know that it wasn't you, it was the True Bloods, but...
It was the True Bloods paper at the time. I think that is not surprising at all. It was a brief stop, and it's very possible that the editor and the publisher did not know who James Dean was, even after the publicity of his death. I'm guessing that. Remember, it was just a roadside stop along 99. It wasn't in the middle of town, which they were used to covering. It was a very small community then, a farming community, and they didn't cover much what happened at the roadside diners.
Yeah, plus, I don't think he was that well-known. He wasn't certainly a household name where, with one movie out, just the math on it couldn't get you to being that big. I mean, I think in certain circles he was known, but he could still probably move anonymously fairly easily, or stop in and buy a paper and not create a stir. It's not like when the president comes to town, and if he has a cup of coffee somewhere, they put a plaque there and take a picture, and it's totally documented. I think at that point, he was still, an up-and-comer,
The ticketing warranted about this much space that week, so the ice cream would probably be proportionally, insignificant. But
Tony, tell us about the contents of the story that you wrote in, I think it was 1985.
I never knew James Dean had any connection to this valley, even though I'd heard about him for years, until about the summer of '85, when the editor came to me, and we always shared trivia questions with each other, and he says, okay, tell me where James Dean had his last meal. And my first response was Buttonwillow, which probably wasn't on 99, of course. And he said, no, it was here in this valley. And I was astonished. I'd never heard that before. This is 23 years ago. So I said, what's your source? And he showed me a James Dean book the next day. It was by David Dalton, James Dean, the Mutant King, written in 1974. And on page 308, it said, they drove along the Ridge Route, then Route 99, and now Route 5, stopping at Tip's Diner for something to eat. Jimmy had a glass of milk. And so I thought about that. I said, this is something new. And then I realized it was about 2 to 3 months before the 30th anniversary of James Dean's death. I said, this could be an interesting story for the paper. So I contacted the manager of Tips. I knew the owner of Tips. I knew the manager of the Tips quite well. And it was Olive Griffin, and I called her. And at first she said, I've heard that. Oh, by the way, she was the manager of the original Tips at Castaic Junction from the day it opened in 1948. At that time that I talked to her in '85, she was at Tips on Pico at Lions. She said, I've heard this before, but I don't think it's true. But I'll ask around.
She called me back the next day and said, apparently it is true. We have a waitress still on our staff, Audrey McGinnis, who did remember Dean Stopp. And Olive said it was the coffee shop he stopped at, not at Tip's Castaic. And she said, sort of defensively, he had nothing to drink. We served no alcohol at the coffee shop. And that there was never an issue about that anyway. So I talked to Audrey McGinnis, and she said, I was not working at the diner when Dean stopped there, but all the girls in the coffee shop were talking about it when I took the job the following year. She said, I even remember the waitress who waited on him. Her name was, she thought for a while, it was a blonde. She'd been there for years. Her name was Althea McGinnis. Well, I went back and found out that Althea McGinnis had died about 10 years before, in the 70s. But Olive gave me the name of the manager of the Tips Diner where Dean stopped, who was then retired and living in Fremont, California, south of Oakland. So I called her, Carmen Cummings, and she confirmed everything. She said, yes, James Dean did stop there on his last day. He was with 2 or 3 people, probably his crew. I remember he was heading to the races in Laguna Seca, in Salinas, because my son was going there that same weekend. He sat at the counter. We all recognized him. Said Althea waited on him, and I believe he ordered breakfast. And Audrey McGinnis, the first waitress who had confirmed this, said to me they received a visit a short time later from the police and private detectives asking about Dean Stopp. She said they were very interested in the time frame. They wanted to see if they could establish how fast he had been traveling between here and the scene of the accident. That was it. The one thing that leads me to believe, not only because of this personal testimony, but the fact that Tips has never tried to capitalize on this famous stop. They've never had a sign up in any of their restaurants saying James Dean stopped here. It's been the opposite. They have kind of swept it under the rug, which makes me believe that it probably did happen.
Well, the distance that we're interested in particularly is the distance between takeoff from Hollywood and the time he got the, what time did he get the cab from
I have nothing on that. 3:30. 3:30.
3:30. So he got, what time did he leave Vine Street? 1 or 1:30, and so it's just on the other side of the grapevine that he gets a ticket at 3:30. So could there have been time for him to stop?
For a few minutes, sure.
Even in 1955, when it took like 2 weeks to get the pop or whatever.
My question, I always wondered when you had a photographer of that level, you know, riding along, why every single second was a stop like that? Why weren't, I mean, they took pictures when they put gas in the car. Mm-hmm. Why not take pictures there? When you've got, you know, an A-list photographer whose job it is to document this young star's, you know, every moment becomes a moment, you know, with him. And he's so photogenic. So where's the shot at the? You hear about it being at the counter. Where's that photo?
So there certainly was time for him to stop.
Oh yeah.
Okay, Ron, did you ever come down to Tips? You know, here in Santa Clarita in 1955 and talk to any of the waitresses or anybody there? You know, one suggestion was that maybe it was private detectives or something. What do you think about that, Tony?
I don't know. I can't say. I would think it may have been someone connected with maybe the Dean family or Beath family. Also, they never apparently questioned the staff about whether he consumed any drinks. That was just a fear of Olive Griffin, the owner of Tips. They were just more interested in the time frame.
Or I suppose it could be a pesky newspaper reporter walking in there saying, I'm investigating the death of James Dean. And yes.
2 theories. They just occurred to me, but one was that I was told by one inquest witness that an insurance man came around shortly after there was a specific indemnity policy on Rolf, and that was also Dean's insurance carrier, and he might have been investigating maybe to evade, you know, some kind of payment or something, but also. Rolf Wuderick, I think within a year, sued Dean's estate for $100,000. And he had lawyers working on contingencies and things, and they may have maybe represented themselves, you know, trying to uncover anything that would discredit Dean and bolster their suit, which was quickly dismissed. But he went ahead and tried to sue Turnipseed, and that wasn't dismissed till 1960. But that's, two possibilities where investigators might.
And one thing that we sometimes read is that he had pie and milk. Was there any pie in there, Tony, or was it just milk?
I didn't hear about any pie. I heard it was milk, but this was from the
the details,
This was from the manager's account, who didn't actually wait on him. I did see a comment in one of the books of one of the gentlemen here, Warren Beath. He said, as they were leaving tips, a waitress stopped Viterick and said, "Was that Jimmy Dean?" He nodded, and she ran in to tell her friends.
That's from that. That's the source of that's that Algene Meltzer article where and then they hug themselves and kind of swim.
Certainly sounding better. Does anybody have anything else to add about this tips stop?
Like I said, I always took it to be true, but my one question is why there's not at least one photo, because a stop like that would have provided a great photo of.
There's not one at Blackwell's.
Oh, that's true too. There's not one at Blackwell's, but that was my only question about it.
Okay, well, let's move on. I know the time is getting late, but let's move on and let's move up the highway a little bit and maybe move along from Castaic Junction, unless anybody else can think of anything to add to that. He gets the ticket from Odie Hunter, and when we talked to Odie Hunter, he mentioned that, I know there was, in Buderick's German account, there was some inconsistency about the speed at which the ticket was issued. But in talking to Officer Hunter, he mentioned that Dean was ticketed for doing 65 and a 55, but for the vehicle that was pulling a trailer, the speed limit was 45. So he was ticketed for doing whatever in a 45. So that would explain the discrepancy in the Buderick account about the speed of the ticket. So he gets the ticket and he goes up, keeps going up 99, out 46, and then he makes this stop at Blackwell's. Take it from there. Anybody?
Yeah, I'd like to add one thing. There was question as to whose fault it was, whether it was Dean or Turnipseed. And of course, there could be no prosecution against Dean because he was deceased. And the question was whether Turnipseed was more at fault than Dean. So the district attorney called the coroner's inquest, which was customary in questionable fatalities. And the coroner's jury, which convened in Jazz Roll, normally, if they have a coroner's inquest, they held it in the council chambers, and there's maybe room for a dozen or 24 people as witnesses. Not witnesses, but just onlookers, spectators. But they had such an outpouring of people interested that they held it at the council chambers, which had hundreds of seats. Anyhow, the coroner jury came back with an open verdict, which indicated that they felt they were both to blame, and they said there should be no prosecution. And we couldn't argue with it at all, so that's how it concluded.
In your studies of this, which have been extensive, does your information, is it consistent with what we've heard Officer Nelson say about, that James Dean wasn't speeding? Is that consistent with what you know?
Yeah, I mean, you probably know more than I, but...
Last 10 years, there's computer technology, and they've simulated it, they've run...
They can create that ride. If no one's seen it, it's amazing, but they put you there at that spot from every angle, and again, they do the math and physics on it, and they've basically determined that what these guys are saying is straight up.
Exactly. It's confirmed the investigation they did with tape measures and, in 1955.
Mm-hmm. And what do you guys, Donald Turnipseed was a resident of the area where you both live, more or less. What do you know about the rest of Donald Turnipseed's life for the next 40 years? I guess he never talked to anybody, right? Except you're one of the few people he ever talked to.
He did not talk to anyone after, I think he had an interview with the local newspaper where he lived in Tulare. But he would not talk to anyone else. And sometime later, after the accident, he was involved in the electrical contracting business. And he had a repair job up in King City, and I was stationed there at the time. I'd been transferred to King City. And I saw that he wasn't going to tell me anything, so I didn't even try to contact him. But he passed away in 1995 of cancer. But everything that I've ever heard does not point the finger at him for talking to anybody about the accident. He was a sleeping dog lie.
Yes.
And then I'm going to shut up. But there was a letter that was sold at auction that he had written, and it was authentic because it was accompanied by 3 photos he had apparently taken in the garage the following days to a friend of his, where he talks about the accident. Just, not describing it or anything, but he did mention it. And afterwards, I will be reading a portion.
Yes.
I read an article in the paper recently that James Dean received more mail today than Elvis Presley.
James Dean received more mail today than Elvis Presley. Yeah, and that's something else. Why do you think that is? Why are we here? Why do we care? What is it about James Dean that everybody is so interested in? Why James Dean?
Well, I mean, I think it's what everyone's been saying. When you take somebody who's so dynamic and so interesting and charismatic, and then in a blink of an eye, he's gone, And then these movies come out that define who he is and what he meant. And again, the timing of it, a year before Elvis Presley, to have all of this pent-up stuff in the country just sort of erupt when Rebel Without a Cause comes out. You can't make that stuff up. And I forget things like that PSA that he did. Again, you couldn't have scripted this. If you wanted to create a pop culture icon 50 years down the line, this is how you do it, exactly like this. And it's funny, it's not like last year. I remember when Heath Ledger died about a year ago, I was interviewed by somebody and they were making all these James Dean comparisons, and I said, look at how they died. I mean, Heath Ledger OD'd in a bed in a loft in Tribeca. That's not what James Dean did. I mean, again, you don't want to glorify any of this, but I mean, James Dean went out in this spectacular way, very different, not, in a whole different manner that I think is, maybe romantic is the wrong word, but something along those lines.
And apparently not his fault.
Exactly. And again, it was just, when you hear this day recreated, and you think, God, if he has one more cigarette at Tips or Blackwell's, the whole day is defined by seconds. I've never seen a thing like this that's so precise, where if he breathes differently getting that ticket, if he spends 10 more seconds talking to the cop who writes him the ticket, everything's different, And that road was obviously, they regraded it. It was on 46 and 41. That's an unsafe intersection. Today, it's not that safe. I've almost been killed there.
Who doesn't believe in fate? Raise your hand.
But it really does. I think fate totally defines what that day was about. Because again, it was a long day. He got up early. There were all these different things in it, whether it was getting gas or taking the car on or off. And I just think, again, you couldn't write this any differently to create what he is today.
Before we close this out, I really want to give you the opportunity to the audience to ask a couple of questions. And I know you've probably got a lot of them, and I know that we've run on way too long. But yes, George.
I've got a couple questions, maybe for the Highway Patrol.
I think you're going to have to come up here and shout or something.
I've got a question basically for the highway patrolman. The follow vehicle, his photographer, and the other gentleman that was in the station wagon or truck, according to the other highway patrol's statement, was that at the scene, or were those people interviewed at the scene of the accident? Are you familiar with those folks at all?
They didn't show up right away. They came along later, and they identified themselves. They did not show up immediately after that.
So they must have been quite a...
We had been at the scene already when they arrived.
Can I add one thing real quick? If anybody ever goes out to that site, if you make the trip out there to 46 and then head west, when you go through Wasco, which is the first town you hit on 46, is the Rose capital of the world. If you ever saw North by Northwest, great Hitchcock film, if you look off to the right in those fields, that's where Cary Grant is chased by the crop duster, which is a great pop culture landmark. And I learned additionally in doing some research at the funeral home in Paso Robles where Dean was taken, a couple blocks away there was a motel. Today it's an apartment complex. A year before Dean was killed, that was where Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio spent their first night as husband and wife. They were driving to the desert from San Francisco. They got tired and just spent a night there. And actually, the woman who stayed...
They stopped at Tips, right?
Pardon?
They stopped at tips,
There were
right?
tips the day before. Had a milkshake and sliced strawberry pie. She did anyway, which stomach contents revealed later, but that's a different book. But you know, the point is, you never know, you know, these little brushes with history, you know. So Joe DiMaggio gets tired and stops. That motel room is forever marked as where they spent their first night. You know what I mean? It's something really interesting about men and women who find their spot and get brushed up against history, and these places too, whether it's Tips or that intersection now called euphemistically the James Dean Memorial Junction, not the crash site, the Memorial Junction, which I think is actually they kind of softened the blow there as they unveiled the 50th anniversary. But it really is, you got to keep your eyes open, and these spots are all around us. They're here, they're in Shalom, they're in Paso Robles. But again, Dean's to me is the ground zero sort of pop culture moment where celebrity changed and movie stars changed and the media changed and a lot of things happened at that intersection that you can never rewrite. I mean, it is what it is.
Who else has got something? Yes, sir, in the back. Skip, that was you. Come on up.
I would just like to ask you, about a year or two ago on television, there was either a movie called The Final Report or Seconds from Disaster. They did a whole hour on the recreation of the accident. Did any of you see that?
I saw it, yeah.
Do you want to comment on it? Was that good, bad, or indifferent?
I really enjoyed it because, again, as I remembered, I think National Geographic did it.
Yeah, one of those.
And it was, I mean, they use the technology today is crazy. I mean, really, when you call up Google Maps today and look at that site, people don't realize how the road used to curve and what the original road scar is. I thought they proved positive everything these gentlemen are saying by plugging in the numbers, you know, and drawing the program that allowed you. They put you behind the wheel of both cars. They look at it from 10 different aerial angles. I mean, so I thought that was very definitive and really a good show. I think they did that in honor of the 50th anniversary, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, I thought if it's the one you're talking about.
Yeah, a lot of animated recreation.
Yeah, I thought it was great.
From what you know, was that accurate recreation, spinning of the cars and all that stuff?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, they took things like the cops took, the tire marks, the time of day, where the sun was sitting, I mean, all those things, and plugged it in, and yeah, I think they did a really good job.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just didn't see the little gray spider in the dusk there.
Who else? There was somebody down front here, down towards the front. Yes, sir, you.
I would like to know what happened. I mean, the officers kept track of what happened to the car. Was the car checked for investigation?
It's one of the great questions.
For a certain amount of time, and what happened to it? Because there's a whole lot of rumors about it.
I know what Chuck Barris says.
Well, tell it, because this is...
Now, Chuck Barris, after Dean, Chuck Barris approached Dean's father and purchased a car after the accident. He's the gentleman that his company, he actually did not write the little bastard in 130, although he'll tell the world he did. He purchased the car, hammered it out, put it on literally a United States tour to, you know, instill in teenagers safe driving. And it toured the country, and somewhere on the East Coast, around Florida or Tennessee or something like that, he claims that after this stop, that it was boxed up and put in a crate and put on a railroad car to come back to L.A. That's his story. Other people have claimed that they've seen pieces of it in his backyard where he has sold, you know, a fender here.
There's a fender at a museum in Chicago, I believe. It's there now, a piece of the car that exists.
Yeah.
And people, they sell bits of the paint. I know the silver paint sometimes turned the skin.
But was the car kept for
and pieces of
investigation?
bathrobe.
Did you keep the car to investigate the car itself?
Well, we looked at the car the best we could because the Porsche Spyder was damaged so badly it was pretty hard to tell if it was mechanically okay, but as far as we could tell, it had no mechanical defects, and the Porsche had no mechanical defects. But that was the conclusion of our investigation on the cars, and they were towed to Marino's garage there in Shalom, and what happens from there is not our business. The legal owner of the cars, it's their responsibility to settle up with Marino and take the car to wherever they want to. I heard all kinds of stories, about the Porsche engine being installed in another car. And the first race that it was in, the driver was killed. And then I heard one that the driver did so well. So there's all kinds of stories that have come out from this accident. One is said that they mentioned the fiery crash of James Dean's accident. There wasn't even a spark there. They collided, but there wasn't even a hint of a flame. But some people just have to add stuff to it, kind of blow it up, even though it's not true.
But it might be those riddles and mysteries that help sort of keep it alive too. Once everything becomes finite, you think about John Lennon. I mean, that was something that happened. It's more modern, but every fact about it, everything is perfectly documented. When you don't know everything, it's good discussion, it's good fodder, and it's a good conversation.
Maybe you're right. It's probably better for the legend that we don't ever
Sure,
prove
a few question marks, I think, are good fuel for things.
Ma'am, you had something down in front here somewhere. I thought it was a young lady, but okay. Come on.
Do you think that, given his adventurous and maybe reckless lifestyle, that had he not died on that particular day, it might have only been a short time later? There's a lot of stars, actors, singers, whose lives have shone very, very brightly, but for a very short time, and then they're snuffed out. We have Gene Vincent, who is buried here in Santa Clarita.
That's right.
Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Eddie Cochran. These were lives who shone very brightly, but for a very short time. Do you think maybe it would have only been a short time later, for those of you, let's say, who have researched his life, that maybe it would have just been, inevitable?
It's hard to say. I mean, look, whenever you race, if he had pursued racing, that automatically puts you in a league that's going to be, more risky than other things. I don't know that he really experienced. I mean, I think there are celebrities who have very self-destructive, almost death wish personalities. He didn't strike me that way. I think he was just an actor who had explored lots of different facets of the kind of acting he wanted to do, and he's very creative and sort of restless. That's how I always sort of viewed it. But again, the racing to me puts you automatically, that separates you, and it's like, if you're a skydiver, your percentages of perishing at a young age are going to go way up if you're doing something inherently dangerous.
Just one more. Let's go over. EJ, come on up. You want to ask something? Come on up.
I actually had a question for Ron and Ernie. This was something that, after our interview, I was talking to Kimmy, and we something that you said that I didn't follow up on the time that I thought was very interesting was about the crash not the crash, but after the crash, Dean and Vita are in the ambulance, and then the ambulance has a wreck, right? Yeah. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, it was a head-on sideswipe accident, because the ambulance entered to the hospital, another car had come in the opposite direction. Very minor contact, very minor damage. Drivers stopped and exchanged notes. We couldn't leave the scene. In fact, we didn't hear about it until sometime later. And that was the extent of it. There were no injuries, and they did what they were supposed to do, was stop and exchange names and vehicle information and so forth.
I guess that's my real question, though. Was that what they were supposed to do? Is an ambulance supposed to stop and exchange information if they have a man who's died in the back and then another one who's injured?
I don't know how the law is written on that, EJ. But I think the ambulance driver probably was just going by past experiences, what he has seen and so forth, because he handled a lot of wrecks for us out there at Salam.
And that was Paul Marino, right?
Yes, it was Paul Marino, the owner of the ambulance and tow service and repair shop.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
We've been gracious enough to indulge us for all this time. Are there any closing remarks that anybody wants to make?
I want to thank the organizers of the. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Ron Nelson.
Well, I've heard that people that have used parts of James Dean's car have bad luck. They've used parts of his car, had bad luck. I don't know if that's true or not.
Does anybody know about that, parts of James Dean's car being used in races where the racer died or whatever, that kind of thing?
Well, that actually happened in Pomona in October of 1956. Dr. Eshrich had lent his friend, a surgeon named Troy McHenry, I think it was the pinion swing arms that were in the car, and it went out of control and hit a tree. And he was killed.
And that was a piece of James Dean's
Apparently, yeah.
car? Okay. Again, anybody? Any final remarks here for the last word on the stop of James Dean at Chips?
I just want to thank you again, and it was really exciting to see the officers and to put together something like this, and something I'm not going to forget right away.
Well, I want to thank all of you and the panelists too, and the professionalism shown in this whole presentation. It was very interesting.
I think I mentioned a couple of potential results, and I think we take option number. I mean, the yes looks really good. Looks better than I think we ever had. You know, that solid of information on it. But maybe in the interest of the legend, we should leave it at option number 4. Make up your own mind. With that, I think our panelists will be around for a little bit if anybody wants to ask some questions. But we're going to be showing Rebel Without a Cause right away. Thank you.